about processing accented speech in a second language, insights from ERPs during sentence comprehension in bilinguals.
Hi guys, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Schubel. I was in Nijmegen, the Netherlands for my PIRE project, and I studied processing accented speech in a listener's second language. My advisor was Jeanette Van Hel, and I worked alongside a postdoctoral researcher, Sarah Gray. It's been a common hypothesis across several studies in the neurolinguistic field that speaker identity plays a large role in the interpretation of speech. Factors such as age, sex, socioeconomic status, and whether someone is a native or a non-native speaker all provide valuable information to the listener about who is speaking. Studies such as Van Berkham's, done in 2008, hypothesized that listeners classify speakers on the basis of their voices, and that associated stereotypes can go as far as to influence neural responses. Accent is one of the most prominent linguistic cues used in forming social categories. Within 30 milliseconds of a single word, a listener can tell whether or not the word they're hearing is accented. This gives them plenty of time in the conversation to form predictions and stereotypes throughout speech. And although we see some research speculating how semantic and syntactic cues can affect the processing of language, we only see this research done in the first language. My study focused on native Dutch speakers, and they were tested in English. I had two main research questions throughout the course of my study. The first one was, do bilinguals use foreign accent as a cue for speaker identity during auditory sentence comprehension? And two, do Dutch-English bilingual listeners process foreign accented English differently for American accented English, and is it different for semantic and pronoun anomalies? We used the event-related potential technique to measure the neural responses of our Dutch-English listeners to pronoun violations, semantic anomalies, and accent variation, all in their second language. We had a total of 25 participants. All were right-handed. 92% reported daily exposure to foreign languages, and 64% reported daily exposure to foreign accents. All of our listeners were biliterate, and they had a good comprehension of the English language, as shown by their Melicet scores. Out of 50 possible points, our participants averaged 42.9. And if we continue to look at our data we gathered from the questionnaire, we see that our participants were all exposed to English in childhood, they had years of formal exposure to English, and that on average in self-rating proficiency, our listeners classified themselves around an average of 7.25. This shows that our listeners all had a good comprehension and understanding of the English language, and that they would correctly be able to identify when facing anomalies. We want to look at two main target structures as well. We focused on subject pronouns in English by giving our participants sentences such as, Thomas was planning to attend the meeting, but she missed the bus to school, and semantic anomaly sentences such as, Caitlin traveled across the ocean in a cactus to attend the conference. We had two main speakers. One had an American English accent, and the other one had a Chinese English accent. We specifically wanted to look at pronoun violations for, as some of you may know, Chinese languages do not use pronouns the way that the English language does. We had a total of 240 sentences that our listeners listened to, and 48 comprehension questions in between. So for example, if our listeners heard the sentence, Thomas was planning to attend the meeting, but she missed the bus to school, they might then be faced with the question of, did Thomas attend the meeting? Using a button box design, they would then answer yes or no. We had 32 scalp electrodes in the ActiCap software, and we data time locked onto the onset of the error or the correct sentence 200 milliseconds pre the stimulus baseline. We looked at three main time windows of analysis: 200 to 400 milliseconds, 400 to 700 milliseconds, and 700 to 900 milliseconds. So let's take a look at the results. So the first condition we are seeing are the American accented speech, and these were the sentences such as, Caitlin traveled across the ocean in a cactus. For anyone who's not familiar with ERPs, right now we're seeing two waveforms. The one you see in black is our control sentence, so Caitlin traveled in a plane, and the one you're seeing in blue is our semantic anomaly. There's two main things we see in these waveforms. The first one is around 400 milliseconds, we see an increased negativity, which we can categorize to be the M400 effect, and around 200 milliseconds, we see an anterior positivity. We're also going to look at the topography of our participants' minds. So this graphic right here shows the neural reactions as they faced our stimuli. Anything you see in red is a strong positive reaction, and anything you see in blue is a strong negative reaction. So we see the same thing that our waveforms represented. Around 200 milliseconds, we see the positivity, and around 400 to 700 milliseconds, we start to see the N400 effect. We're going to look at the same sentences now, but with the Chinese English accent and condition. Here we also see an N400 effect around 400 milliseconds, but it's important to note that this reaction is very reduced and delayed in comparison to its American counterpart. Our topography shows us the same thing. After the stimuli, we start to see increased negativity around 400 milliseconds, but it continues on into 700 to 900 milliseconds and reaches its peak there. So now we'll focus on the pronouns. In the American accented English condition, around 400 milliseconds, we see an increased positivity, which we can once again classify to be the N400 effect. And our topography shows us the same thing. After the stimuli, we see an increased negativity, peaking around 400 to 700 milliseconds. But when we look at those same sentences in the Chinese English accented condition, we see something different. There's actually no distinguishable difference between our control sentence and the pronoun mismatch. Our topography once again shows us the same thing. There's no prominent negative or positive effect throughout the sentence. We wanted to look at sentence comprehension to make sure that our participants actually understood what they were hearing and that our results weren't simply just a misunderstanding. But we see in the percent average correct, our participants averaged about 90% accuracy in the American English accent and condition and about 80% accuracy in the Chinese English condition. And there's variation between both of these. So some of our participants were able to answer the Chinese English questions just as well as the American English questions, and vice versa. We also wanted to see who our participants thought they were listening to. So we asked them, did you notice a difference between the two speakers? And if so, what is it? We see something cool here. Only 8% of our participants correctly identified that what they were hearing was an Asian accent. In fact, the overwhelming majority, 32%, simply thought that they were hearing a difference in dialect. So this is like a Southern Californian, or a Southern or Californian or a Texan change. So, to summarize, we see N400 effects through the majority of our conditions. In the American English semantic condition, we also see an anterior positivity before the N400. In the Chinese English condition, we see the N400 that is reduced and delayed. In the American English pronoun mismatch, we see the N400. But in the Chinese English pronoun mismatch, we see nothing. So our results provide further evidence for the hypothesis that speaker identity plays a large role in listener comprehension, and that this observation can not only be applied to our listeners' first language, but we can apply it to their second language as well. All of our native Dutch participants show a strong endorsement of the idea that pragmatic cues can result in different neural responses and could be applied across bilingualism. Hopefully, with further studies in the field, we can continue to increase our knowledge of how and why these mechanisms come into play, and we will continue to learn more. And then before summing up and letting everybody get out of here, I just want to say a really quick thank you. PIRE has been one of the most amazing undergraduate experiences I've ever had. It's given me a passion for research I never really knew I had, and it's given me such confidence. Like, I was 21 and I had my own office in the Netherlands. Like, how many people can say that? That's pretty cool. I'm looking now into graduate programs with a strong emphasis on research as well as research positions, and I'm excited to see where this all takes me. Thank you so much to everyone involved, especially the PIRE Executive Board, and especially Jeanette Van Hel and Sarah Gray. You guys have supported me since day one, and I can't even begin to express my gratitude for that. So, thank you very much.
And there is time for questions.
So I noticed that in the American accented N400 for the semantic violations, that it was much more left lateralized than the N400 for the Chinese accented speech. Is that significant in any way, or is that just kind of emergent from the fact that the data tends to be highly variable?
You mean why the Chinese English accent is more reduced? Like
why
or more delayed?
So in the scalp topography, here for the semantic violation, it's much more, the peak is on the left, and then in the Chinese accented speech semantic violation, it seems to be more centralized. Is there any reason for that difference?
I would hypothesize that it might just be that the accent is a little bit harder for the listeners to comprehend. I don't know if it says much about the actual semantic violation in general, more just about our listeners' comprehension of it.
Other questions? Yeah?
Do you have any thoughts about the positivity that you're getting in the American English condition for the semantics? Because I assume you didn't expect that.
Yeah. I think that's because of a prediction being violated. When our listeners heard the American English accent, they tend to form predictions into what they're about to hear. And when they hear the word cactus as opposed to plane, it's a little bit of surprise. They're taken aback. And this prediction has been violated, which is why we might see the positivity.
Why do you think you didn't get an effect with the pronouns in the Chinese accent speech?
That is a good question.
Do you have any guesses? That's a harder question to answer.
Yeah. I honestly don't know. I'm not sure. It could once again just be that the language is harder to comprehend for our listeners. It could be that they form predictions that they would be more likely to hear errors. I can't really say for sure.
That's a good idea.
What do you think the results would look like if you did a Dutch accent in English as one of the conditions
A Dutch accent language.
for the simulator?
That's a good question. I think we would still see the N400 effect, but I think it would be a little bit more, we wouldn't see like an anterior positivity, and we wouldn't see it delayed or reduced. We would just see like the classic N400 in response to the semantic violation.
Laura? Yes. I'd like to call the 6 Pioneer undergraduate students to the front, please.